alcoholic? A couple announcements. After we are through for today, if you want to help with cleanup, please see Bill. Bill, stand up. There you go. All your help is appreciated. There's some flyers back there for the State Line Retreat if anybody's interested, and that's the end of the commercials. There's some interesting questions here. If you could sum up a spiritual malady up in one word, what would it be? Oh. I don't know if this is one word. Self-consumption. I don't know. Self, ego, me. I don't know. That's a one word's hard. If a sponsee is not following your suggestions, what should you do? I try violence, actually. It's just buckle in and enjoy the entertainment value of what's going to happen. I sometimes people learn more from their own self-will in sobriety than they learn from doing the right thing. I just have to remember that, because I have a tendency to, if I'm getting aggravated because one of my sponsees isn't following my directions, I got a little bit too much of me in there, I think. So just enjoy the show. What if life itself was just a great play written by one of the greatest romantic comedy writers in the universe? And this play will delight you. It'll tear you up in gratitude and move you at times. It'll make you laugh so hard you can't even imagine it. But you never get to appreciate any of it if you're trying to direct it. It's my job just to sit back and watch the show. And if the play calls on me to say something, then I'll try to say something. I'll respond. Otherwise, I just try to be helpful and play my character, play the role he assigns. How do you know when God wants you to take action? Change job, change relationships, or is it of self? That is such a good question. Everybody asks that question. I was obsessed with finding what God's will was, because I'd been to a lot of meetings, and I heard the miracle story after miracle story of people that were trying to get their way and they couldn't, and it was horrible, and they surrendered, and they turned themselves over to God for whatever he wanted, and his will came about, and now they're the president of Caesar's Palace, and it was just wonderful. And I learned from listening to you that if I could figure out God's will, chances are I'm going to get a bigger piece of the pie. So for very selfish reasons, I was trying to figure out God's will. In We Agnostics, it talks about how none of us will ever comprehend or understand that thing which is God. But I try to figure it out because I want leverage. I want a little inside track, because it's all about me. But over the years, I've discovered something. I seek God's will now because I'm tired of seeking mine. I mean, I've sought mine, and I've gotten mine, and it ain't that hot. There's a couple things that God's will has in common, and I always look for the markers. Usually, it's the greatest path of love. Any vision of God's will that only benefits or has to do with you is probably not a vision of God's will. God's will usually involves serving the greater good, and it usually has something to do with you helping someone else. God's will never feels like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. God's will usually flows. If there's difficulties with it, it is usually in my resistance. It seems to happen and unfold of its own. It's easy. It's free. And it really has very little to do about me. That's what I know from my experience. What advice would you have for someone who has never had a sponsee stay sober? Stop buying them drinks. No. I'm such an idiot. Just keep persisting. Whoever wrote this, please don't fall into the trap. Don't give up. Don't give up. People give up, and they miss this whole thing. I run into people all the time that are sober. I get people ask me to sponsor them. I got someone right now is 28 years sober and is depressed and wants to go on medication. And I said, well, let's try some things first, and if you still want to do that, you're free. I can't stop you. But would you try some things first? And I said, I want you to start sponsoring people. And they said, that's not my niche. Why do you say that? Well, I sponsored 3 people and none of them stayed sober. So I don't mind making coffee or giving somebody. I'm not a sponsor. It's just not my niche. And I always want to tell them the story of Bill Wilson. December 15th, 1934, Bill Wilson exited Towns Hospital for the last time. He threw himself obsessively into trying to help other alcoholics the day he got out. The day he got out. Through Towns Hospital and the efforts of the cooperation of Dr. Silkworth and through Sam Shoemaker and the Calvary Chapel, and also his involvement in the group in Akron, King's School, and helping Dr. Bob and Bill Dotson get things rolling there, and all the stuff that Bill did. He never stopped. He never stopped. And the estimates are, the estimate that I think is most accurate is that from December 15th, 1934 to May 10th, 1935, which is about 5 months, just about, not quite, that Bill Wilson worked with 96 failures. Nobody stayed sober. We had one person committed suicide in their house on Clinton Street. Another guy, Bill had one suit for interviews. A guy stole his suit. Another guy stole their coffee pot. And nobody stayed sober, and he was so frustrated. And right before he went to Akron, where he finally met Dr. Bob, and the first successful 12-step work took, and a guy actually stayed sober. He had a conversation with Lois, and he was discouraged. He'd worked with probably 95 people by this time. None of them stayed sober, and he said to Lois, I've been wrong. This is terrible. This isn't working. I should just go get a job somewhere. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. You've had to work at Macy's all this time for trying to keep us with a roof over our heads, and I haven't helped at all. And it's not working. And Lois said to Bill, but you're sober. And he goes, oh yeah, I'm sober. And he went back to Akron and met Dr. Bob. So if you worked with 3 people and none of them stay sober, I think you got about 93 more to go before you should give up. I think at least go as far as Wilson did. Persist. God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave, and it'll be, for the most part, in 12-step work. Find a fishing pond. Here's what I tell. I got a couple people that I started sponsoring with over 20 years. They were depressed. They're doing very, very well right now because they followed this direction. I said, find a fishing pond. Find a place, whether it's a detox, recovery house, halfway house, treatment center. Find a place where there's a whole bunch, it's a well-stocked pond of newcomers. And you want to go there at least once a week. And you want to get there early before the meeting starts. And you start shaking hands and start talking to people. And you want to have conversations such as, my name's Bob and I'm an alcoholic. I'm from AA. How you doing? And, oh, I'm doing all right. And, you ever been to AA before? No, it's my first time. Or, yeah, I've been in and out for 5 years. And, I was in and out for a while too. I understand that. There's no shame in that. We all do. We all takes what it takes, and you start. Then you get around to the subject of sponsorship. Do you have a sponsor? And if they say yes, well, here's my number. I'm a good backup if you can't get a hold of your sponsor. If they say no, you say to them humbly. You say, it's very important for me to try to sponsor people. It's a big part of my recovery. If you want to be sponsored, I would be honored to do that. Here's my number. And if you do that with some consistency, you'll be amazed how every once in a while you'll say that to someone and you will see their whole facial expression change because they have been battling with themselves for some time to ask someone to sponsor them, and they're too afraid to ask. And you just solved their problem for them. Some of them will light up. They'll go, yes. Remember that Bill Wilson didn't go seek out Dr. Bob because Dr. Bob was an alcoholic. Bill Wilson sought out Dr. Bob because Bill Wilson was an alcoholic. And Bob never asked for help. His son sat in my living room years ago and told us the story of he was 16. He had to drive his dad to Ann and Bob are in the back seat because Bob's guilty because he screwed up Mother's Day and was drunk, and she's making him go, and he doesn't want to go. He doesn't. Oh, not another lecture about my drinking. Oh my God, I don't want to go. I'll go. All right, 15 minutes, please. Don't make me stay in there longer than 15 minutes. And he went in there and stayed several hours because it was nothing like he expected. Bill Wilson never once talked to Dr. Bob about Dr. Bob's drinking. Not once. Bill Wilson just talked to Dr. Bob about Bill Wilson's drinking. And he told him all about him. Bill told him all about Bill. And the connection was made. He came out of there and he was lit up. Lit up. He said to Ann, he said, this guy knows what he's talking about. He'd never heard anyone who, as if he'd been reading his mail. It was amazing. And, Bill didn't have enough money to pay his hotel bill or get back to New York. So when Bob said, why don't you come and stay at our house for a while? And Bill said, well, I think I will. It was opportune for Bill. Would you be willing to share your contact information? Oh, okay. Yeah, I will put, I am in the phone book. My name is Bob Darrell. I'm in the phone book directory in Las Vegas. And I'll tell you why. I had a listed number, and I was just thinking about making it unlisted. And I was around my sponsor, and I heard him talk to a guy, and he said to the guy, how come your phone number is not listed in the book? What, are you afraid some newcomer might call you? So I've been listed in the book ever since. Yeah, there's some contact numbers there. How do I keep from being full of self-pity, resentment, self-centeredness when I have a chronically ill spouse? Our relationship began as a result of infidelity. We all have problems from time to time in sobriety. We all have times when I've had times when it's almost like this. this fog, this thick fog just blankets me and just comes down, and I can't see anything except problems everywhere I look, and all I feel is bad emotions. And it's just, when that fog of self settles in, the only thing I know to do is to find a newcomer seeing eye dog to walk me out of the fog. Is it I have to do what Bill Wilson did, and then that's the actions of self-forgetting. And you don't want to do it, do you? Problems are seductive. Problems will draw you in, and you'll become obsessed with them. You will never find the solution contained within the problem, no matter how hard you stare at it. So I get up off my butt, and I go down to the West Care Detox, and I go to a meeting there, or I go over to the Samaritan House, or I go somewhere where if I interact with someone who's not doing very well, God can use that situation to relieve me of the bondage of self, because that's the problem. The problem is never what it looks like it is. The problem is the bondage of self. So, and it's a weird deal. You know, the first line in step 5 in the 12 steps and 12 traditions, Wilson says that the 12 steps are actions that run contrary to what we want to do. My sponsor always talks about contrary actions. It's when I'm in a lot of pain and my life is turning into crap, the things that will help me don't look like the things that will help me. But I have to be willing to take actions that aren't my first choice. Call my sponsors, good. Says, thanks, Bob. There is a practice of prayer called fasting or abstinence. Can you relate this to the saying, God loves drunks and I don't know if I understand I don't know if I understand the question. If you want to see me at the break, whoever wrote that, and it's I'm not sure what the question is. Anyway, love, tolerance, and acceptance versus healthy boundaries. Oh. Boundaries? What? It sounds like a very effective self-management tool. I mean, I don't understand boundaries. I understand spiritual principles. I understand intuition and getting direction from God and from my sponsor. I understand right actions. And I also understand the need to not try to control things, but just take. You know, one of the lines in the book that has meant a lot to me over the years, and it's very, very few people can buy this 100%, and I don't know that I do 100% all the time, but I buy it pretty much. It says in there that we found that spiritual principles would solve all our problems. If there's going to be boundaries in my life, I don't want to set them. I mean, I'm an idiot. Why would I want to set? Let God set them. Let my sponsor set them. I'm not going to set them. I mean, why do I want it back into the management business again? My God, after all I've gone through, drunk and sober, especially sober, why the hell would I want to be back in the management business again? My boundaries look more like walls, I think. I don't know. I don't even understand. There's a couple things that have creeped into AA the last half dozen to 10 years that I don't. Another one is you need to work on your issues. That sounds like let me at my life. I mean, I don't, from everything I've experienced here, that just seems, those things seem like dangerous positions to take for me. I don't know. That's just, I could be wrong too. Do you have assignments you give sponsees for step work? What are they? Well, I don't like to, I'm not a fan of the word assignments, but I do, I get a guy brand new. First thing I want to do is I want to interview him the way it talks about in working with others. I think that's a lost art. There's a lot of people that come to AA, and you need this interviewing process, because not everybody that ends up in AA is an alcoholic. And sometimes we do them a great disservice by wanting to own them when they really should be maybe in a different 12-step program. Alcoholics Anonymous is for people who suffer from alcoholism. And what does that look like? That means that an alcoholic can never safely use alcohol. An alcoholic is a person who may have a lot of drug problems, they may have sex problems, they may have gambling problems, they may have just gossip, they may have all kinds of problems. But the universal problem that is necessary for them to become a member of AA is an allergic reaction to alcohol. And that is paramount. And the reason that is so important, because if they don't have that, that means that person could have one or two drinks at their own discretion whenever they wanted to, and it doesn't do nothing. It doesn't make them continue. They have and I'll tell you what happens with that is we end up with members of AA that can drink, and some of them do from time to time, but they don't want anybody to know, because those people in AA are a little fanatical about that stuff. I don't know if Dan remembers. I was down. This was 7.5 years ago. I was doing a step workshop in Tucson, Arizona, with a friend of mine from Tennessee, Scott, and I kicked it off with the doctor's opinion, and I spent a lot of time talking about the physical allergy to alcohol and the phenomenon of craving. And at the break, a woman came up to me who had introduced herself before the workshop started, and she showed me a 30-year chip. And I thought, that's great. And this was the beginning of October, and if I was going to make it to the end of that month, I was going to get a 30-year chip. So this would have been like a little over 7.5 years ago. And I told her that. I said, oh, man, if I make it to the end of the year, end of the month, I'll get one of those. She comes up to me to the break, and she's like very quiet. She looked, making sure nobody's listening, and she says, I don't have that thing you're talking about. And I said, well, what thing? She said, I don't have that allergic reaction to alcohol, that phenomenon of craving. Well, she's 30 years. She's got a whole row of women she sponsors there that are fairly new. I said to her, well, for God's sakes, sometimes you don't see it because it uses your own, you think it's your idea to have another drink when it's really the phenomenon of craving. It's been 30 years since you had a drink. You just don't remember that cause and effect, maybe. And she goes like this. It was so cute. She went, actually, I have a drink once in a while. My face fell. And she goes, but I don't get drunk. I don't get drunk, really. I just have one or two, maybe a glass of wine. I don't get drunk. I said, wow, how long have you been doing that? Well, my whole sobriety, but it's just one or two. I don't get drunk. I said, God, didn't it feel bad taking a chip for 30 years? She said, well, yeah, but I don't get drunk. And we talked. She never was an alcoholic. Her husband was an alcoholic. He sent her to a couple Al-Anon meetings. She did not like Al-Anon. She came to AA and fell in love with AA. Well, if you're an untreated Al-Anon, this is a room full of your drug of choice, for God's sakes. I mean, really. And here, this happens more, I think, than we suspect. She identified with the emotions and the way we felt, and even though she never had a problem with alcohol, and she could drink safely if she wanted to, even though she really didn't want to and didn't like to get drunk, she concluded that she must be alcoholic since she has the same feelings. That is scary. How would AA feel to a guy or a gal that this is life and death? If all of a sudden one day you realize that maybe half the people in the rooms aren't alcoholic and they drink, some of them drink occasionally and they get away with it. I'd be pretty hard for me to trust anything here, wouldn't it? And I've seen a little more of this than I've ever imagined was possible. Now, sometimes I hate to even talk about that, because there might be some newcomer here who really is alcoholic and is instantly going to think, well, that must be me. No, not necessarily. But Alcoholics Anonymous, it's implied in the word alcoholics that there's got to be a problem with alcohol. You can have a lot of other problems. We don't care if you did cocaine or heroin or you choked little baby chickens' necks. We don't care. But you got to have alcoholism to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The long form of the third tradition, as it was originally written by Wilson, says it best. He said that alcohol membership should include all who suffer from alcoholism. I'm an everyday member of Alcoholics Anonymous because I suffer from alcoholism. And left unchecked, I will drink again. I mean, I have an ego, like a lot of us do, that like to tell me I'm bulletproof, but it's BS. I've seen better men than me with more time than me drink again. Right? Because I have alcoholism. And I don't have that luxury. Anyway, I got to kick that soapbox out of the way, for God's sakes. If a sponsee stops calling you, do you call them? Yes. But usually not more than once. I'm not going to stalk them and I'm not going to chase them. The page 96, it says don't chase a man who won't work with you. But I'll call them once, maybe twice, maybe. And I do it not so much for them, because if they've left AA, they've left AA. It's probably not much I can do. But I'll take a shot. And the reason I'll take a shot is that if I don't at least try to call them and just at least give it a shot to bring them back in, and they die, I'm going to feel bad that I didn't give it a shot. So I give it a shot. Most of the time it's futile. Every once in a while, it'll surprise you and you'll bring somebody back. You never know. Most of the time, not so much. How do you work the steps if you're in survival mode financially? Oh, that's the best time to work the steps. The steps are better when you're in crisis, really. Matter of fact, if you're doing really well, you might not need the steps. If you're doing, but yeah, I think one thing is that working the steps is going to get your mind off the problem and it's going to get it on the solution. Feelings on friends with benefits. We are not going to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems and benefits. I don't know. What is the difference between a heavy drinker and an alcoholic? A lot. I knew, on page 20 and 21 in the book, it talks about three types of drinkers. One is the moderate drinker. That's like my sister, who couldn't really take it or leave it alone. My daughter's like, she's so non-alcoholic. I'll tell you a funny story. I love my daughter. She's so amazing. But she's so normal that I often think aliens brought her or something. She is very cool. She calls me up last year sometime early. Yeah, she calls me up and she's like, she's very kind of excited and a little worried. She said, "Oh, Dad, I almost got a DUI." I said, "Kate, really? I didn't think you drank that much." Well, I said, "I don't really," but I said, "What happened?" She says, "I was at Stoney's, and Stoney's is a dance club where she likes to go with her friends, and they do line dancing, and she drinks. She has a drink, here and there." And I said, "Well, what happened?" She said, "I was at Stoney's. I'm partying with my friends. I'd been in there almost 6 hours, Dad. And I came out to get in my car, and I'm pulling away, and I'm talking on my cell phone. The cop pulls me over, and he gives me a breathalyzer test. He said, 'Dad, I was scared to death. I thought I could lose my job. I could lose everything. I was terrified.'" I said, "For God's sakes, Kate, what happened?" She said, "Well, I blew a little bit less than a .05. I said, "You were in a bar for 6 hours and you blew a little bit less than .05? I said, "Kate, please don't tell my friends in AA that. Ruin all my street cred." I had to blow a 1.5 just to have the courage to go to a bar. Right? And then we have the second type of drinker. That's the moderate. They can take it or leave it alone. What? A .05 is like less than. That's like you ordered a drink. It sits there and you forgot about it for 40 minutes. So that's what that is, right? That's crazy. Then we have the certain type of hard drinker. They look like alcoholics. Most therapists and doctors would diagnose a hard problem drinker, as it's talked about in the book, as an alcoholic. The symptomology that it says in the book, and you could even expand this from your own personal experience with problem drinkers, is that the guy he's drinking habitually. It says he has the habit badly enough to eventually impair him physically and mentally. Drinking habitually to the point of mental and physical impairment. This is not good. This is a problem. It says that he may even die years before his time. And then here's the difference between him and me. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, warning from the doctor, an ultimatum from the boss, the wife, the whatever, if he gets in a lot of trouble, if he gets a DUI, if he's standing before a judge and he gets an ultimatum, if something happens to him of sufficiently strong reason, he comes to his senses and he gets it that, oh my God, I got to stop this. And he does. Or he has the ability to reel it in enough and just moderate it. I've sat on airplanes with guys, and they'll bug me, where they keep asking me questions. I don't really want to volunteer that I'm going to an AA thing, but I eventually, if they bug me enough, I'll say, "Well, I'm going to participate in a weekend conference." And, "Oh yeah, what kind of conference?" I said, "Well, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. I go there to share my experience." "Oh," he said, I used to be an alcoholic. Now he has a beer in front of him. I said, "Really?" I'm looking at the beer. He said, "Oh yeah, when I was in the Navy, I was in and out of the brig. Oh my God, I was in trouble all the time. I got a DUI. It was really bad. But I just grew up, and I just have a beer once in a while." Wow. You didn't used to be an alcoholic. You might have been a problem hard drinker. But an alcoholic can't do that, and he can't even stop completely. A non-alcoholic. I know. I was deeply in love at one time in my life. Well, sort of. She had a job in the apartment, and I had nothing. It seemed like love to me. And I'm a bad boyfriend because I drink and pass out, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, on a couple occasions, wet the bed, and I'm not a fun guy, and I'm pathetic. And she was tired of it. She was tired of I was just erratic emotionally, and she gave me an ultimatum, and she said, you either quit drinking or you're out of here. And I got nowhere to go. I'm so afraid of losing her because I have no self-esteem. I hate myself truly, and I'm convinced that no one else would ever love someone like me. And I'm desperate to not lose her. I lose my place to live and she supported me, really. And so I got detoxed and I got off of everything. And I'll tell you, it wasn't very long being off of everything that I just started noticing everything that's wrong with her. And I needed to tell her. Because she needed to know. And we started fighting, and oh man. Until after a couple weeks of me being sober, she said those words. She said, "I liked you better when you were drinking." I thought, me too. Me too. I liked me better when I was drinking. I liked you better when I was drinking. See, because I knew a guy that did the exact same thing, and he was able to put the plug in the jug, and he never went back. And he was fine. After a certain period of adjustment and detox, he was fine. But the problem with alcoholism and a chronic alcoholic, my problem really starts where the bag and the bottle ends. My real problem is abstinence. And it doesn't appear that way at times because of the consequences of my drinking seem so intense. It's much like the days when the moon and the sun are in the sky at the same time. When that occurs, you can't see the moon because the sun is so glaring. But in actuality, the moon has the greatest pull on the earth and the greatest influence. The moon will affect the tides and the currents much more than the sun. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Because the sun is so glaring. And often the consequences of my drinking are so glaring and so horrific that I don't see what's really the problem. And the problem is this stuff that goes right below the horizon when I get sober, these squirmy little emotions and feelings and all the stuff that just inch me back towards another drink eventually. I am not a problem drinker. I'm a real chronic alcoholic. Okay, it says, my first husband passed away. It was very apparent I owed him an amends in light of his devastating terminal diagnosis. Making amends seemed futile. I owe amends and should, I don't know if this is a question, and do it on his deathbed if you can. I don't know if he's still alive or not. If you can see him, yes. Don't wait. The clock's ticking. If he already has passed away, and it's not 100% clear to me because of this, if he has or not, in the book, every contingency for amends is talked about. Wilson was brilliant in the chapter Into Action. He was brilliant. He says it in there at one point that some people can't be seen, so we send them an honest letter. My grandfather, who I owed a big amends to, couldn't be seen because he died. He was dead when I got sober. So I wrote him an honest letter. And in that letter, I said everything that I would like to have said to him if I could have sat across a kitchen table with him. I said the things that selfish people don't think about. Thanking them for the good things they did. It's so easy to see the things that we have objection to, But I never thanked him for the kindness and the love he exhibited towards me as when I was a little kid. And then I told him about how sorry I was that on the morning when I went back from his wife of 60-some years' funeral, that the night before the funeral I had found all the sleeping pill, the barbiturates and narcotics that she had been on before she died. And he had to find me the morning of his wife of 60-some years' funeral on probably the lowest day of his life. He found me on the floor, unconscious, with a needle in my arm and blood running down my arm. I told him how sorry I was that I did that to him on the worst day of his life. And I said everything to him I would like to have said to him in person, and I did this twice in 2 different letters. And the first time I did it, I took it out in the desert outside of Las Vegas, which it would now be probably at Red Rock or somewhere. Now it'd be the middle of a housing complex, but at that time it was nothing there. And I went out there and sat, and I read that letter, and I cried, and I burnt it, and I got a feeling of somewhat closure, and then I was